Hello everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Daily Gwei Refuel, where I recap the latest news in the Ethereum ecosystem. I'm your host, Anthony Sassano, it's the 20th of October, 2022. Alright everyone, let's get into it. So CAD is out of the bag. There is a lot of drama that's happened over the last 24 hours, but to give some context as to what that is, basically all the stuff I spoke about yesterday with regards to SBF of FTX and the anti-DeFi bill that he was lobbying for and trying to get pushed through in the US, it turns out that that stuff was true. I mentioned yesterday how I believed that was true based on a lot of different people that I had heard it from, but it could still be a rumor. Well, it seems like it's true now. And SBF has his own thread on this, which I can't show you because he has me blocked on Twitter, unfortunately. But yeah, so the bill itself may be confusing. You may be wondering, what is this bill? Why are people kind of up in arms about it? Well, Alliance DAO on Twitter here did a really great thread on this bill. So it's called, or I guess the acronym is the DCCPA bill. And they say the DCCPA greatly threatens DeFi innovation. The proposed bill gives the CFTC, which is the Commodity Futures Trading Commission, new powers to regulate spot markets, which they actually just traditionally regulate derivatives, not spot markets, forces human intermediation, and forces projects to sacrifice decentralization. It favors centralized incumbents and kills startups. And the Alliance DAO opposes the DCCPA. And there's a thread here explaining in a bit more detail about all these points here, which you should go give a read. But basically, the key is it favors centralized incumbents and kills startups. This is why someone like SPF is lobbying for this. He runs a big centralized exchange, right? And it would be very beneficial for everyone to have to be forced to use his centralized exchange instead of being able to use DeFi and on-chain products and all that sorts of stuff. And I spoke about all this yesterday, so I'm not going to rehash it. But essentially, I am very happy to see the pushback on this from the community within not just, I guess, like the community members on Twitter or on Reddit or wherever else, but also people that can affect change and are in the US and do hold positions of power and can go and try and get this bill, I guess, changed or amended, because it's not law yet. Bills get amended over time, but if this bill ends up going through, we want it to go through with what we want to see in it. We don't want it to go through with anti-DeFi measures in it. And as it currently stands, at least the bill that I saw, there's some stuff in there, or a lot of stuff in there, that doesn't even make sense. So, for example, I think part of the bill requires that all Uniswap liquidity providers need to kind of do KYC and AML on people that trade through Uniswap in the pool that they're providing liquidity to. I don't know if that's in the current version of the bill. It may have been part of another bill, but there's similar things to that in it. It's just unworkable. It's a really weird kind of bill here. So I'm hoping that the things can get amended because there is going to be some form of this bill that gets pushed through. As I've said to you guys, regulations have been coming for a while for crypto, for DeFi. They're not just going to give up and leave it on the table. They're going to go through iterations of this bill, or maybe a different bill, and put in things that they want to be in there. But it's on us as a community to lobby against that, lobby against the, I guess, bad things that are in there, the unworkable things, and make sure that if anything goes through, which, as I said, there's something is going to go through, is that it's not going to kill DeFi, it's not going to kill crypto, and it's all going to be well and good there. But as I said, you can read the thread here from Alliance DAO. I'll link it in the YouTube description below, but I'm sure a lot of you saw the drama on Twitter today around this and all the different comments and stuff. I'm not going to go through all of those. I covered it enough yesterday, but I do want to say one thing. People like SBF and a lot of other people in this ecosystem, especially on the centralized player side of things, it's good to always default to recognizing that these people are profit maximalists. Now, profit maximalist doesn't gel well with decentralization maximalists. A lot of decentralization efforts actually fall to altruists, right? Let's take an obvious example. Running a full Ethereum node, you don't get paid to do that. You only get paid to be a validator. So running a full Ethereum node is a purely altruistic endeavor. Maybe you do it because you want to relay your own transactions, and maybe you're helping some friends, maybe you're letting some friends connect to it, and they can relay those transactions, but that's still altruism, right? You're not charging for that. If you do begin charging for that, well, then you're no longer just a full node, you're a full-blown service provider, and there's different kind of complications that come along with that. But just running a normal full node for yourself is done altruistically because you're not getting paid to do that. As I said, you may get value out of it. You may be able to use it as your own RPC, and you may feel like you're contributing to the decentralization of the Ethereum network, which you definitely are, but you're not getting paid for that. So a lot of what and also things like client diversity on the Beacon chain, while it's definitely ideal to have a diverse beacon chain and a client diverse beacon chain. It is not strictly something that is profit driven, right? It's definitely got a sprinkle of altruism in there as well. And there's lots of examples of this in the ecosystem. But when you think about it like that, the profit maximalists and the decentralization maximalists, so to speak, are at odds with one another. If you want to be a profit maximalist, you don't really care about decentralization. And I think that there are a lot of people in this industry that run big centralized companies that couldn't care less about decentralization. They see crypto for what they think it is, which is just a casino. And to be fair, a lot of it is a casino, and they take advantage of that. They extract value out of that, and then they go and do things that protect themselves, like that cozy up to regulators, as I discussed yesterday, and push through regulations that are bad for their competition. Because at the end of the day, DeFi is stiff competition for CeFi. It's actually eaten a lot of their market share. But also, I think that CeFi should recognize that DeFi grows the pie for everyone. CeFi can still act as a very nice on and off ramp, especially for fiat. And also, they can build front ends on these things, on the DeFi protocols, and offer these to their customers. So they don't have to go by the wayside. They don't have to be obsoleted. They just have to change their business model. But a lot of these bigger centralized companies don't want to do that. They'd rather kill their competition with regulation and with government power over these sorts of things rather than compete, which is just, I think, really, really shitty. But it's good to keep in mind that there are a lot of people like that in this ecosystem, a lot of profit maximalists. They aren't exactly shy about it, and it's pretty obvious to me which ones are profit maximalists in this ecosystem, but maybe it isn't to first cyclers. And I think that's what the profit maximalists count on, is that these first cyclers come in, they've got all this money that they just throw into whatever, and then obviously these profit maxis know how to play the game a lot better than the noobs, and they fleece the noobs for all they've got, so to speak. So yeah. And speaking of this DeFi bill as well, or I guess like general protections or general safety of DeFi versus traditional finance, Jake Shavinsky had a really great thread out today. Very, very short thread, but basically he starts it off by saying, contrary to widespread belief, traditional finance is not safe for consumers or investors. Sure, it's dressed up to look that way, but its neat and tidy image is a thin veil for institutionalized discrimination, exclusion, and exploitation. Crypto offers a different approach. And then he continues by saying, traditional finance is dominated by large institutions, trusted third-party intermediaries who make a business of extracting value from the system at the expense of their customers and in service of their shareholders. They keep all the profits and socialize all the losses. Traditional finance keeps its risks hidden in a black box or buried in hundreds of pages of quote-unquote disclosures that nobody ever reads, but that somehow give cover when things blow up. Crypto, by contrast, wears its risk on its sleeve. It looks messy because you can actually see it. Does that mean all of crypto should be unregulated forever? No, of course not. It's already regulated in many ways and by many agencies. But let's dispense with the falsehood that crypto is more dangerous than TradFi just because it doesn't wear the same lipstick. I think this is just an amazing little short thread here that really articulates exactly why people fight back against people saying TradFi is safer, it's more regulated, blah, blah, blah. As I've said before, the centralized exchanges, especially the ones in the US, are probably regulated more heavily than banks at this point. They have to do so much compliance stuff, so much KYC, so much AML, and they have more access to more data than banks do, because everything, even on chain, is easily linked to people's addresses in their database, right? So they're regulated as heavily, if not more heavily, than these banks and other traditional finance institutions. And on top of that, they're not as protected, or not really protected at all, like these banks are. As Jake says here, the losses are socialized. The banks get bailed out because they're quote unquote too big to fail, right? Whereas crypto exchanges and crypto DeFi protocols and all that sorts of stuff, they don't get bailed out at all. They are allowed to fail, right? The only the only people they get bailed out by are other companies. For example, companies buying or offering to buy things like Celsius and BlockFi, that's private companies bailing out. That's not the government. Whereas the government in the US, what they did after the 2008 financial crisis is that they bailed out the banks. And the banks got to buy other failed banks, got to get all their assets, all their customers, everything like that, and then get bailed out on that bad debt, so to speak, by the government. And where does the government get the money to do that? Well, they either print it, or they take it from the tax revenue, or they do both. Both of those things are what's called socializing the losses. Tax obviously comes from citizens, right? It comes from everyone, but a lot of ordinary citizens who had nothing to do with the financial crisis at all right? And printing it just basically socializes it to every single person that's holding US dollars and every single saver, because it inflates the value of a dollar, right? It makes the dollar worth less. So the banks always come out on top, especially in the US, because of the fact that is that they get bailed out. Whereas in crypto, as Jake says, we wear it on our sleeve, right? We wear the ugliness and the openness on our sleeve, and everyone can see it, and everyone can see what's going on. Whereas in traditional finance, you can't see shit, right? Not even governments have a good view of this stuff, because there's just so much that they have to look at that they just, I mean, they have agencies on it and everything like that, but I doubt it's very efficient. I doubt it catches many criminals. There's been tons of instances of criminals being able to use these systems with relative ease in order to launder money, break sanctions, do all sorts of things, right? So yeah, anyway, I thought this is a great thread from Jake. If you want to reread it again, you can. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. But now onto some core dev updates. So Tim Biko put out a small note here talking about, I guess, the next all-core dev call, and consensus layer call, which is starting next week. So the agenda is at this GitHub link, which you can check out yourself. And he says here, even though there haven't been public calls over the past month, I've had a ton of conversations with client teams, researchers, EIP champions regarding how we should approach Shanghai/Capella, which is obviously the network upgrade that comes after the merge. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But essentially what this boils down to is selecting which IPs should be included in this fork. There are a lot of candidate EIPs. I believe last time I talked about there were over 25 of them. Obviously, we can't get 25 in the network at once. That's just not going to happen. It's just too much to happen at once. So we need to cut that down. And I think the focus of the first call back is starting the conversation on this and going through which ones people want to discuss, which ones people think are more important than others, which ones are being championed more than others, and seeing how that all shakes out there. So I'm excited for the all core devs calls to come back and the consensus layer calls to come back. I hope the core devs have had a good break. Obviously, we had DevCon So we had the merge, and then core devs went on a break. We had DevCon, which from what I saw was really amazing. So I hope they're really, really recharged and ready to go. And as I've been showcasing on the refuel as well, a lot of them didn't really take a break. They just kept working on things, which is fine too, whatever floats their boat. But yeah, this next all core devs call and consensus layer calls will be held next week. All right, so something that I've spoken about before on the refuel is the concept of single slot finality. Now, just a refresher here, on Ethereum under proof of stake, we have a finality threshold around 13 minutes. Well, I mean, there's like an exact number in there. I'm not going to get exact with that, but basically every 6.5 minutes, there is an epic, and after 2 epics, there is finalization of the chain, which, as I said, happens around 13 minutes. Now, this has been something that people have been critical of, saying, that's too long. We should aim to do finality as quickly as possible. And then the idea of single slot finality came along, which is basically single block finality. So finality within 12 seconds. So every Ethereum slot in proof of stake is 12 seconds. So how can we do finality in a single slot? Well, Vitalik put out an updated document on paths towards single slot finality. It is quite lengthy. It is quite technical. I learned so much reading this. I highly recommend giving it a read, because what Vitalik does in this post is he breaks down each of the paths that we could possibly take, their trade-offs, and why things aren't going to be as easy as people think they are, depending on the path that we take, and some hard questions as well. I think the hardest question or hardest thing to think about from this proposal, from this document that I saw, was around the monetary policy change. So you'll read the document to get the full context here, but just trying to TLDR this, or trying to simplify this. Basically, one of the proposals suggests that we we cap the amount of validators on the network, and then we shuffle the validator set, right? And then we do an uncapped ETH stake. So for example, instead of only being able to stake 32 ETH per validator, you could stake any amount of ETH you wanted per validator, right? At least that's my understanding from the document. But as I said, you have to read the document to get the full context here. But this would lead to a monetary policy change if we did economic capping. And this would also reduce the security of the Ethereum chain, or the Ethereum proof of stake chain as well. Now, to be clear, this is not the path that has been decided on. This is just one of the possible paths, and I just really highly recommend reading this whole post to get a gist of what I'm talking about, because I can't simplify it, I can't TLDR it. I only read the post once, so obviously don't understand it well enough, but also it's not something that you can just simplify into a 30-second soundbite. You definitely have to read it to understand all of this, because there's not just the economic considerations, but there's also the considerations around how the proof of stake consensus engine actually works, how the Finality engine works, how to achieve single slot finality, the trade-offs that take place in that, the positives, the negatives, all of that. It's all in this document. You should go check it out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, so an update on EIP 4844 here from Jesse Polak, who's one of the people working on EIP 4844 from Coinbase. So TLDR is that the effort came in with a bunch of momentum, ran multiple high-impact working sessions during the conference, during DevCon, identified a few small spec changes, and is moving full speed ahead on implementation. And you can check out this thread for all the details on that. But it really does seem like 4844 is moving ahead really, really quickly at the moment. There has been some concerns with complexity here and how complex it is for each of the teams on both the execution layer, consensus layer side to get this done, and if they're able to get it done in time for the Shanghai update, or if we should split up the EIP 4844 into a later update and just have withdrawals as part of Shanghai and a bunch of those other EIPs that I mentioned before, but we'll see. Once a spec is finalized, once all the parameters and variables are finalized and the spec is quote unquote frozen, then client teams can start building this stuff out for test nets and then for main nets, because right now it's just dev nets from what I've seen. And the dev nets obviously aren't set in stone. They're very loose, very kind of messy, but that's the first step towards these sorts of stuff. So just great to see there's tons of progress being made on 4844, which is proto-dank sharding, to get cheaper rollups, 10 to 100 times cheaper rollups on Ethereum here. Now, Polynya had some thoughts around EIP 4844 as well. They start off this thread by saying EIP 4844 is targeting a minimum gas price of 0.0001 ETH per blob. So blobs are those transaction types that store call data, or the new transaction types that will store call data in 4844. So this means that data component for the average rollup transaction would be in the 0.0000x dollar range. This means rollups can grow, hundreds of times from today's activity, while data costs remain in the that range that I mentioned before. And they shared a screenshot here of a slide deck from a presentation talking about this, and then added a bit more of a thread here with explanation on this. So basically, I guess what Polynya is saying here, that with 4844, Ethereum's data availability capacity skyrockets and the cost just collapses completely. And you've probably heard about data availability a lot lately, especially with other chains and networks talking about this a lot that I've mentioned previously, like Celestia, Polygon Avail, Eigenlayer. It's definitely a big topic of discussion, but I often wonder if, these things are needed if Ethereum gets 4844 out in a timely manner and then keeps scaling up from there and keeps costs so low that it's basically negligible. Because a cost lower than a cent, like 1/10 of a cent, 1/100th of a cent, 1/1000th of a cent per transaction, is stupidly cheap, right? And it depends on, I guess, like what transaction you're doing as well, and the economic weight behind those, and obviously trying to prevent spam. You have to have some minimum amount here. I mean, there's going to be a lot of spam if your transactions are like 1/1000th of a cent, as opposed to transactions costing 1 cent. And as I've mentioned before, I think there is a Goldilocks zone when it comes to transaction fees. So, for example, if you have like a transaction fee floor, like a minimum transaction fee of 1 cent, then I think that would actually be fine for a lot of users. But you could do fee markets in different ways. You can have it so that the network minimum is 1 cent, but what the users see is much lower than that, right? And then you kind of like aggregate it together, do some fancy stuff in the background, and be able to kind of like aggregate that and show users cheaper transaction fees than that, just to prevent things like spam. And there's also quality of service things you can do as well. I mean, it just depends on what trade-offs you want to take. As I've been critical of quality of service stuff before, because it can lead to censorship. But I guess like generally censorship is such a big discussion now that we may even solve that just accidentally through all the stuff that we've got that's being worked on right now. But yeah, we're gonna have to see how this shakes out. But 4844 is coming, and it's coming really quickly. I'm super excited for it, but we'll have to see how this shakes out over the next few months. All right, another thing I'm really excited about that Argent put a tweet thread out today about is called account abstraction. And I've talked about account abstraction before. It's basically the concept of getting rid of what's called an externally owned account and making all EOAs smart contract accounts. So as I've said before, there's two types of accounts in Ethereum: EOAs, externally owned accounts, which are normal Ethereum addresses, and smart contract accounts, which are pretty self-explanatory. Account abstraction would make EOAs into smart contract account types as well, which means that we would just have one account type you would have to deal with, and it leads to a lot of great features that come with that. And in this thread, Argent explains these features in plain English. If I've ever recommended a thread to read about something in Ethereum land, this is probably really high at maybe not at the top of the list, but really high on the list. It is one of the best threads I've ever read on anything. It just so simply explains exactly what account abstraction is from first principles, and with examples as well that actually shows you why you personally would get value out of this. So I'm not going to read it for you. I want you to go read it. Even pause this video and go do it now, because I thought it was just a really, really awesome thread that explained the concepts in an easy to understand way. And anyway, I'll link that in the YouTube description. You can go check it out. All right, so the block today is reporting that Fidelity Digital Assets will begin offering ETH to institutions later this month. I thought that they were already doing this. I remember covering this on the Refuel, covering something got to do with Fidelity on the Refuel and ETH a little while ago, but it seems that they haven't been doing this yet. So yeah, they'll be offering their ETH to institutions later this month on October 28th, it says here. So institutional customers will be able to buy, sell, and transfer ETH starting October 28th on the Fidelity Digital Assets platform. Pretty cool. I think that, as I said before, the more, I guess, of these markets that get opened up to these institutions, especially in the bear market, the better it's going to be in a bull market, because there'll be more people that are able to access this sorts of stuff. It's going to bring more liquidity in. It's going to be better for the overall market health. And these are the types of things that we saw go live last bear market that ended up being really good for the bull market. So yeah, we'll see how it plays out when the bull market inevitably comes back. But great to see more institutional players being able to get involved with ETH as an asset. All right, so Optimism has got a thread out today where they start off by saying the Optimism Collective, retroactive public goods funding, OP chain, super chain, OP stack. What are these crazy concepts that these irrationally optimistic people are going on about? These back-to-back talks by Carl and Calvin at DevCon 6 hold the answers you seek. So this is a thread, mini thread on basically two talks and a blog post about these things that I mentioned here that you may be confused about. So definitely go check this thread out. I'll link it in the YouTube description below, and check those talks out from DevCon, because Optimism is doing a lot of amazing work on their own network, but also for Ethereum. That I think that watching these videos, seeing and listening to the people building this stuff talk about it and kind of getting that information firsthand is very, very important. So you can check this out in the YouTube description below. All right, so Slingshot has put out a teaser video today and followed this up with a tweet saying, Slingshot wallet is now available on TestFlight for the first 1,000 on the waitlist, Android coming soon. So the Slingshot wallet has been in works for a little while, and I should disclose I'm an angel investor in Slingshot, so I know about this. I was able to get early access to the TestFlight version of this wallet. It is really snappy. The UI UX on this wallet is actually really awesome. It's one of the best I've seen, to be honest. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an investor. It genuinely is. And if you are one of those who got access to it because you were the first 1,000 on the wait list and you have an iOS device, well, you will know what I'm talking about here. So this is super cool. Slingshot isn't live on Ethereum mainnet just yet. It's live on it went live on Polygon POS chain, and it's live on a bunch of the L2s as well. Like I believe Arbitrum and Optimism, but a little birdie has told me that Ethereum support should be coming relatively soon, Ethereum mainnet support, which is really awesome. So you'll be able to use this wallet to use this mobile wallet with Slingshot to use Slingshot's decentralized exchange aggregator on all these different networks. I think they're going to be adding support for as many networks as they can, especially EVM compatible ones, to trade assets as you wish, basically. So yeah, if you're lucky enough to get an invite because you were on the wait list, congrats to you. You'll know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who haven't, I don't think this will be in beta for very long. So hopefully you'll be able to download it on its public release relatively soon. All right, so speaking of good threads, this I guess has been a theme of this refill episode, threads. The founder of Sismo here put out a thread about his long-term vision for self-sovereign identities and ZK badges. So this was basically summarizing his talk from DevCon, which you can check out at the YouTube link here, which I'll link in the YouTube description, and there's also slides as well. But the reason why I wanted to highlight this thread in particular was because you guys know I'm a big fan of Sismo, obviously as an investor, but also because I love what they're doing with self-sovereign identity and ZK badges. I think it's going to unlock the next big use cases of this technology. And I've explained why in previous refuels, and I thought this thread was just a really great explanation of how the founder of the project sees this stuff happening, the practical applications of this, and how that's going to affect you as a user in crypto and even outside of it as well. So you should definitely go check out this thread. I'll link it in the YouTube description below. All right, I've got a few minutes left here. Wanted to end today's episode with just a bit more chatter about the regulatory stuff. I think I may have said this before on the refill, but it bears repeating. When it comes to regulatory stuff, don't panic and panic off of like mainstream media news headlines or just news headlines generally. A lot of the time, it takes a while for things to actually be pushed into law or to become actual regulations. Right? A lot of the times, the things that you see that look really, really bad ends up getting amended and go through in a much, healthier way, or go through and they aren't really that bad, right? This happens time and time again, not just with crypto stuff, but with everything. But on the flip side of that, you need to be really, really aware of the fact that things can get snuck through with, names attached to them that make them sound innocent or make them sound like they're actually doing something good. So, for example, a popular thing that's done in politics is naming your bill something like the Protect the Children Act, right? Or Stop Terrorism Act. And then in that bill, shoving stuff in that's got nothing to do with protecting children or stopping terrorism. But if the politician votes against a stopping children, did I say Stopping Children Act? I meant like Keeping Children Safe Act or something like that. I don't know why I said Stopping Children Act. If a politician votes against like the Keeping Children Safe Act or a bill related to that, well, then that looks really bad, right? Because a lot of people don't dig down and see what's actually in the bill. They just see the headline and think, wow, this politician's evil. They don't care about children at all. Like, I'm going to vote against them. I'm going to tell them, I'm going to give them peace of my mind. And that's how they can get a lot of these things in, because they just hide it underneath this, innocent-looking bill, an innocent-looking act. So you have to basically be very aware of this, and you have to basically not just read the headline of the bill, but dig into it. And thankfully, we have a lot of people in crypto that do this and do threads of it and everything like that. A lot of really great lawyers on Twitter that do this. So I think we're covered for the most part, but it's always good keeping in mind that don't just read the headline of a news article. Don't just read the headline of a bill and think, oh my God, the world's ending, everything's over. We're all going to, everything's going to zero. This industry's over. That's never the case. It's never going to be the case. There's always nuance to all of these discussions, and you should definitely be aware of that when looking at these things. But on that note, I'm going to leave it at that. So thank you everyone for listening and watching. Be sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet. Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the newsletter, join the Discord channel, and I'll catch you all tomorrow. Thanks everyone.